Hello, and welcome to Jason Cavness Experience. I'm your host, Jason Cavness. Our guest today is Kristen West. Kristen, you ready to be great today?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Kristen founded AS Solution because he couldn't find an executive protection company he wanted to work for, the kind that replaces cookie cutter security with a dedication to keeping clients safe, as well as happy and productive, all based on a solid understanding of the principles, corporate culture, and personal preferences. He's a hands-on professional who leads from the front. Kristen has developed and led protection programs in more than 170 countries for more than 25 years. He has worked all areas of protection from undercover to high risk, government, corporate, celebrity, and high net worth. Kristen has served as a close protection agent, team leader, EP specialist, EP manager, and a high-level consultant for many Fortune 500 companies, and has directed security efforts for war tours for major artists and the world's largest IPO roadshow. Kristen, thanks so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me on the podcast.
Yes, and you used to live in Seattle, but you're in Vegas now, right?
I do. I mean, I've been down here in Vegas for about a year and a half, but before that, I was in Seattle for 12 years.
And so you just moved to Vegas to move the company there, better business opportunities, to get more sun, get away from this crazy gloom and doom weather here we have in Seattle?
Well, I'm actually one of the few that absolutely love the weather up there because originally coming from Denmark, it's Denmark in Europe. It's actually kind of the same weather as Seattle has. Just Seattle is kind of better because it doesn't get as cold as it does back home in Denmark. But I grew up with the rain and the gloominess and all that, so I don't mind at all.
So like home to you then?
Yeah.
So Kristen, a few years ago, you wrote a book called like Intro for Corporation and Industry Professionals. Can you talk about that book, or like why you wrote that book?
Yeah, I've been in executive protection my whole life, and when I started in this business, it was kind of like not a real industry, right? There were some teams here and some teams there, and we all kind of like tried to do the best that we could, but none of us had a lot of corporate experience. And over the 20 years I worked in this field, it has become a real industry. And over the years, I've had a lot of good colleagues who has written really, really good books about how you become an agent and how you work as an agent, where nobody has really done it on how you build a corporate executive protection program. And more important, a book that caters to supervisors, detail leaders, and even managers. And the company that I used to run and own, we had so many good examples and so many good notes, and we started up so many programs that we kind of decided it would be a great thing to see if we could put it all down in a book. And that's kind of like the main reason for why we did it.
So the book, did you self-publish it, or was it published like through one of the big publishers?
No, it was self-published and primarily sold online and via Amazon.
Well, for anyone out there about to write a book, any lessons you could pass on to them, what they should do or not do?
Well, first of all, it's a lot of work. One thing is actually getting all the content together and writing the book. But what I find is the hardest is once you've written the book and you kind of go over it and getting ready to publish it, that's when it becomes really hard, especially when it's a kind of like professional learning book, because you have to be sure that what you say throughout the whole book is kind of the same message, which of course it is, right? But when you kind of piece together notes and chapters and stuff like that, sometimes you can corner some of the terms or whatever the wrong way. And a lot of times, some of the stuff that we talked about in this book, there is no set terms for, right? So a lot of times you have to be sure that the readers can understand what it is that you're talking about. I actually think that's the hardest part. And people think that or a lot of people have this idea that writing a book is easy and you make a lot of money on it and stuff like that. I definitely think if you have something that you want to talk about and whatever, get it out there, write the book and whatever, but don't do it for the money and expect it to take a long time and be a lot of work.
Kristen, from the time you had the idea to write the book to date it was published, how long was it? Like 6 months, a year, shorter, longer?
Well, for us, it was around a year, But we were kind of lucky because before we started the book, we wrote a very serious blog. And in this blog, we had probably, when we started the book, written about, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 kind of very in-depth blog posts. And they were some of the chapters, right? If we had to start from the bottom, I would think it would have taken us a little bit longer. But from we started like being serious about it till we had the book in the hand was roughly a year.
So after the book was published, did you have any instances where like other protection professionals came out trying to troubleshoot you, saying, no, I disagree with this or this is wrong? And if you did, how did you deal with that?
You know, it was surprisingly few that came out with any criticism or different ways of doing things. And we're pretty, how shall I say it, either lucky or whatever in the protection industry because, you know, there are no set standards, right? We don't have a set standard saying that this is the way you should do it. We all typically lean up against how it's done in the government or how it's done in the Secret Service or whatever, and then we adapt that to private life. But since there is no kind of set standard, it's hard for anybody to kind of like come out and second guess what you're saying, or everybody can come out and second guess what you're saying. The thing that we were pretty lucky with is that we've been doing this for a very long time. And most of the things that we talk about in this book has kind of become, how should I say, like the guiding principles for how you do executive protection, right? We were just the first one who kind of sat it down and did it for corporations. So we didn't get a lot of criticism on this stuff here.
So how does one, do you have to get certified? Do you have to like do some kind of credentialing, or can I say, I'm Jason Cavness, I'm gonna start an executive protection company? Like, how does that work?
Unfortunately, you actually could. You could
That
apply
can't be
to get,
good.
yeah, it's actually a little scary because, and I got some horrible examples. Like, first of all, it varies from state to state. And some states have very strict guidelines. They have a very stringent process on how to get your license and how to get your certification and all of that. And then other states, it's harder to get approved to run a cleaning business than it is to run a security company. And
yeah, or barbershop or nail salon or restaurant.
Exactly. And most security companies, actually, most executive protection companies actually fall under the same rules as uniformed security companies. And uniformed security companies probably have some of the lowest certification process and process for getting the licenses in some states, right? So it's not hard to start a company, unfortunately. And once you start the company, each of your employees, of course, has to get a license or a guard card or whatever it's called in the different states. And that varies from some states. It's actually a process where you have to go through X amount of training, and in other states, pretty much just have to fill out the paperwork.
In general, from your point of view, how do most police departments look at executive protection agency? They look as a nuisance, a valued partner, or how is that dynamic?
You know, it depends a lot. I would say when I started, most police officers were kind of very standoffish, and most police departments were very standoffish. Because 25 years ago, first of all, we weren't as good as what we did. I mean, we weren't as squared away. We weren't as good at reaching out. We weren't as good as cooperating and stuff like that. Where now, I think most police departments are either happy with us, embracing it, or pretty neutral. It's very rare nowadays that I hear police departments that are kind of against the security industry, because most people these days have figured out it's a partnership. And people got to remember that anybody in security is supposed to be a proactive function. We're there to hopefully prevent something from happening, where most police activity is kind of a reactionary force, right? That typically comes out if something has happened, or they come out if they have suspicion of something happened, right? And a lot of times we use each other a lot. Of course, security use police way more than they lean on us, right?
Can you talk about something called the hasty advance? What is that about?
When you go out and do executive protection, one of the most important functions that you have is that you go out and do what we call advanced work. Advanced work is typically kind of like planning taken to extremes, right? Because you make a plan for how you're going to provide the security for, let's say, a visit to downtown Seattle. Then once you've made your plan, you actually go down as an executive protection agent and walk the routes. You know where to park your cars, you know which floor you're going to, you know exactly who you're meeting, you got the contact information for these people, and you kind of do the whole plan ahead of time. So when you come with your VIP, you know exactly somebody's meeting me here, we park the car there, they help us get into the first meeting room. Once the boss has done whatever business he has there, we move to this place and to this place. That's typically how the day goes. That's what we call the advanced work, when we go and do it ahead of time. But like everything in life, everything changes. And a lot of times we go out and we do the advanced work, and in the middle of the day, things change due to circumstances that are out of our hands. And then all the advanced work that you have done, you can typically throw out the window, because all of a sudden we might not be going to that location, we go to another location. And if we have spent a whole day kind of preparing for this, and you only have 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever to kind of do what I call the hasty advance, then that's kind of what you do there. What do you prioritize? How do you do it? In which order do you do it? And what can you, what maybe you don't have to do, because you have to kind of like choose to not do all of it, right?
So, of course things happen, and maybe this has never happened to you, but in the past, how have you dealt with customers? Like, it's still like every 10 minutes, something's changing, right? They're always flip flopping, going back and forth. They're doing this thing. How do you have dealt with that?
Well, in general, security is, like I said, all about being preventive, right? And if you have a really good plan of how to kind of like protect your principal, how to move from A to B, and you kind of done most of your work ahead of time, you can kind of mitigate a lot of the threats. And when we talk about threats, a lot of people think about, it's Al-Qaeda, or it's snipers, or the mafia, or whatever. Most of the time, of course, that can't be the case, but it's fairly rare. A lot of times, executive protection is also about facilitating and make the days better and easier and faster and get more stuff crammed in, right? So a lot of times when you do the same things over and over and over again, you figure out how your clients like the way you do your security, but more importantly, also how you can be more efficient, right? And once you put that aspect into it, you also break up the monotony quite a bit, and you kind of can challenge yourself and get out there and do it again and again and again, right? So I hope that kind of answers the question.
It does. And like, how do you make money? You like charge per hour for a service for your dude? Is it like product based, a combination, retainer fee?
It depends a little bit. Most there's really two types of ways executive protection is sold. One of them is, if you can imagine, it's principals who need security on an ongoing basis, where they have X amount of security agents that work with them and protect them. So they work on kind of like a ongoing schedule, and they take care of all the events throughout the day and stuff like that. That's kind of the ongoing, we call them embedded contracts, because your team come and work at either the company or the client's house and whatever, and they work with them all the time. And then there is what we call the temporary assignment. That's typically based on something has happened of one kind or another, and it's shorter terms, right? So you go there maybe for a day, maybe for a couple of weeks, maybe until, if there has been some kind of incident, until that incident has died down. Those are typically the two ways that executive protection is sold.
And is what you do different based on a person? Like, example, if you're doing this for like a movie star or concert or singer versus a CEO of a Fortune 100 company, or is it basically all the same things that you do?
I would say it's probably 60% the same, because the principles are the same, right? The principles that we use are the same. But of course, the environment that the people are in are very, very differently. A lot of times when you work for celebrities and singers and athletes and stuff like that, it's very, very challenging in a short period of time, right? Because they go out and they're around a lot of people, and they have to go out to promote or to perform or whatever it is that they're doing. Where a lot of times when you work for the CEOs and the Fortune 500 companies and whatever, it's more kind of like an ongoing thing, right? It's not as peak because they don't kind of like do the same thing. They might go to concerts and stuff like that, but then they go as a guest, and it's very different than actually being on stage, right? But the principles of how we protect is the same, if that makes sense.
It does. So people like, let's say the limelight on them, so to speak, in the public is a little bit harder to take care of them, so to speak.
Yeah, there's a lot more eyes on, and if you have a couple of hundred fans waiting outside and stuff like that, it is very, very challenging working through that whole environment, and that's kind of the image a lot of people see for bodyguards and executive protection and whatever, because that's what you see on TMC and on TV and stuff like that, where most of the work that we actually do takes place outside of the limelight. And especially when you work for the bigger corporations, they have other challenges like international travel, very, very busy days, and always something happening. And, not all companies have the best reputation. There are people that are getting fired. There are a lot of stuff, right? So I would say you can't really, I think both the celebrity world and the corporate world, the risk is kind of the same, but it's just different phases. So it's an interesting twist between the two, that's for sure.
And in the celebrity world, like you're talking, someone has 200 fans going to meet him, like there's no way to tell if one person's like a stalker or out to get him, right? Unless, of course, they maybe wrote some letters or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in your experience, do stalkers, do they actually send letters in or make itself known like that to give you a heads up, or is that pretty much like you don't know until they actually try to do something?
Well, typically when you mention stalkers, it's a process, right? That starts with some kind of a contact, and then it goes on for a while. And one of the things that both in the celebrity world, but also, believe it or not, in the corporate world, there's just as many stalkers or pursuers, or we call them either POIs or BOLOs, POIs as people of interest, or BOLOs as be on the lookout. And it's typically a process, right? And if you're a good executive protection agent, you pick this up, you work with the EAs, you work with the people who handle the mail and stuff like that, and you pick it up early, and you kind of figure out, is this kind of a fan? Is it a fan that's kind of like misunderstood a little bit, or has this threatening nature? If it has a threatening nature, is this something that's realistic? Is it somebody who have the means and potentially could do something about what he or she is threatening to do? And you slowly try to figure out who is this person. Maybe you can figure out who they are, find a picture of them or whatever, so you know who you're looking for. But a lot of times you don't know. And then you just know that maybe you've had a pursuer or a stalker who's talking about an incident on this and this day or whatever. And then you have to build your security plan accordingly, right?
Yeah, no, I can't think of examples. But you always hear the news, about people going to court, for harassing people, stalking them. Celebrities like what's it called, the cease and desist order. Stay away, send them on the feet, whatever.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? And if you're able to get to there, well, then the people who are stalking them is actually committing some kind of a crime, right? And you can get the police involved, right? But a lot of times you haven't gotten through there, right? And when you go out, you really separate between two different things, right? There is the people who seize the opportunity, and those are a lot of times way more harder to deal with than people who have made some kind of a plan, right? Because if we have somebody who's a stalker or a potential pursuer that says, hey, at the concert in, let's say, Seattle, I am going to make contact with you. Okay, well, then we know that something will happen. Maybe we drive in underground, go into a secure elevator, go directly into the green room, from the green room directly on stage. On stage, we have a guy on each side of the stage. There's a fence in front with concert security. It's relatively secure. We can take the principal out the same way and stuff like that. It totally sucks that you have to do it like that, but you can keep the person secure. What's really hard is if there is somebody who seizes the moment that we don't know about, right? Because then it can pretty much be anybody who recognizes this person and wants to pursue for an autograph or think this person is really, really annoying. A lot of times what we see, if we take people to sports games, is that there's a lot of emotions in the fans. And, if you go to a football game somewhere, there has been some layoffs or whatever. Maybe the owner has been involved, or it's the owner from the other teams and stuff like that. And all of a sudden people are yelling or trying to make contact or whatever, right? And you weren't prepared for that because you didn't really have any warnings, right? So those two things can be really, really hard to separate, and definitely something you have to be aware of on both sides.
Yeah, I remember a few weeks ago, or maybe it was a month. I have no track of time anymore. When Dave Chappelle was doing some concert, I think the Hollywood Bowl, and some dude jumped on the stage, and it being the guy was kind of, kind of deranged and kind of had trouble, mental problems. But he just jumped up there, it's almost like security wasn't even there. I'm sure they were there, but it's like it happened so quickly, right?
Oh yeah, no, and that's one of the problems that you have, right? Because this is by no means easy, because you got to remember that most people who hire us has some kind of a public profile. And in this public profile, you still want to appear approachable. You, of course, don't want to send a signal that you're scared. And maybe you don't even know something is supposed to kick off or whatever. So if you think about it, if Dave Chappelle in that incident has one or two guys, they would typically be placed either on the side of the stage or down in the pit in front of the stage, or at least one of them, and then one up in the backstage area. But if this guy decides to jump the fence from the other side, you'll always be kind of a couple of steps behind before you get there. So as an EP agent, you got to rely on concert security. You got to rely a lot about on physical security, like barriers and fences and stuff like that. Else it's impossible for you to secure the principal completely. Excuse me.
So this guy who jumped on the stage with Dave Chappelle, afterwards he just got his ass kicked in, right? He got beat up pretty bad. So my question is for you, like for your people, suppose they had to put your hands on someone and had a kind of I don't want to say beat somebody up, be rough someone. Can that person then file charges against you for assault, or how does that work?
Well, that's always the next problem that people have, right? Because when you are a security agent, you don't have special police powers or whatever. You're here to kind of protect your principal and protect yourself. And if you are a good security agent, what you do is you take your principal and you get away from the danger. Put yourself in between and get the principal out of there, because typically the attacker is worried about the principal. It's not our job by any means to rough anybody up or use excessive amount of force or anything like that, right? And I think it's very, very rare. I read somewhere that most of the roughing up happens in the fall, and when concert security kind of intervened and stuff like that, right? And a lot of times there's a lot of people that kind of want to help out, and it's actually a little bit of an incident and a little bit of an issue sometimes, because if I'm hired to work for a principal who says, hey, if something happens, you got to make it look good. We don't want extra publicity out of it and stuff like that. And you might have that under control. But if 10 other security people that don't work for you tries to help you out or whatever, it doesn't look as pretty as you wanted it to do, right? And it's not always your jurisdiction, because if you're only with the client, but you're at the Hollywood Ball, there's probably Hollywood Ball security. Then there's probably front stage security. And all these different security companies have different rules and different kind of ways to engage. And so you don't always know. And I don't know who roughed up this guy, but nobody should do that. At the end of the day, it's just like being arrested for a crime. You have to use the force that is necessary, but we're not in any way judges or whatever, so we can be sued exactly like everybody else.
Yeah, I'm thinking probably some of Dave Chappelle's friends probably jumped in. They got a few licks in, you know.
Yeah, and you got to remember, a lot of times we're actually at really high risk at this, because most of the people that we work for have pretty high profiles and also pretty wealthy. And in some states, there are lawyers that reach out to people and say, hey, did security lay hand on you, or what happened, or whatever, to kind of see if they can sue the principals. Not so much the security agents, because typically we fall in the middle. But if there is an opening for a sue on the principal, that happens, unfortunately.
So Chris, on your website, you have a lot of great courses that you give or provide. Can you maybe cover a couple of them?
Yeah, my new startup here the last 2 years has been something that I call EP Access. And what they are is, during COVID, when we all were kind of sitting at home and I was kind of in between jobs and stuff like that, I realized that I've been doing this for almost 30 years all over the world. And I've had a lot of amazing people that has worked for me, and some has retired and some are still there in different capacities and stuff like that. But I've gotten a ton of knowledge and know-how, and I would love to share that, right? So it actually started out with me doing some online training for a couple of people that we couldn't be with because of COVID. And then I figured out, hey, this works. It doesn't totally kind of like substitute physical training, but it's a supplement to the physical training that we always used to do. And that's kind of what we're doing now. And we have courses in, believe it or not, online courses in security driving. We have online courses in the medical stuff that we do. We have online courses. We just loaded up a new course with what we call tactical communication, but it's really conflict de-escalation, how to talk to people so they kind of calm down instead of go crazy, which is super important. We have courses in soft skills, advanced work, and we're constantly working on new courses that we're going to put up there.
So Christian, you bring up a good point. Can you talk about the points of de-escalation? I think a lot of police departments get criticized, I think rightly so, for always, upping the ante, so to speak, instead of de-escalating items. Can you talk about the points of that?
Yeah, it's one of those things where before I started in executive protection, I worked as a nightclub security or a bouncer back home in Europe. And you figure out pretty quickly when you're a nightclub security that there's always somebody bigger and stronger than you. And you don't really want to get into any fights with anybody, because one, it's no fun when you've done it a few times. You have the chances of getting your ass kicked or even worse, but again, also be sued or have problems with the police or whatever. So if you can avoid trouble, that's by far the best way to do any security. And some people have made it almost an art form to talk to other people and de-escalate conflicts and stuff like that. And it's one of those things that's very, very useful for executive protection agents, because we like to avoid trouble and we like to avoid confrontations. But a lot of times we also have to rely on ourselves and our skills to kind of get what we want, if that makes sense, right? Because let's say that we would love to cut across the field in halftime of something to avoid having to go through all the people or whatever. You might have to argue with the local chief of security or venue security or whatever, right? And you have to be able to argue your case. And the one thing you cannot do is you cannot come up to a screaming match or whatever, because we're always guests at somebody's house and we're always representing our clients. So it's very important that whatever we do when we solve conflicts or whatever, we do it in a very, very nice way, right? And that's the whole thing about conflict de-escalation is if we can tone it down and get what we want, we already won, in my opinion, at least.
So how does insurance work for you? I have to imagine your insurance premiums are kind of high because you got to cover liability of different things. How does that work for you?
Sorry, I didn't get
the insurance. How does that work? I have to imagine the premiums are pretty high.
Yeah, they are. I mean, like anything in the insurance world, once you have done what you're doing for a while, and they see it's not as risk heavy as most people think in the beginning, it becomes a little bit more manageable. But insurance is a big thing, and especially for the protective details that use armed agents, the risk is of course high, and insurance rate goes up and stuff like that. But you can mitigate a lot of it with good training and good SOPs and good procedures and stuff like that, right? And it's built in to the service already from the beginning if you're good at what you do, right? So it's not easy, but it's doable.
So Christian, what do you think most people get wrong about your industry?
I think people get a lot of things wrong. I think if you look at most people that think about executive protection and bodyguards, they think about two things. They either think about the big guys with the sunglasses that are pushing people out of the way that we saw in the older days in kind of like the celebrity world, or they think about Secret Service, who is always in a suit, look like $1 million with their sunglasses and their earpieces, and they run next to the president's car and whatever. And that's none of these two are correct for what we do, right? I think that's one of the biggest kind of misunderstandings. The other misunderstanding that everybody has about being an executive protection agent is that it's a very action kind of field, because, oh, you know, these guys probably fly around the world with their guns, solving problems, saving the world, like the hitman's bodyguard or whatever. And that's so far from the truth as it can be, right? But
I have to imagine y'all bored quite a bit of time.
Oh, I mean, it's really funny because, you know, a lot of people who also come into this industry think it's like that, and that's why they kind of are drawn to this industry. So it's kind of a big wake-up call for them when they figure out that most of the time we actually made a career out of waiting for other people, right? Because we sit outside doors and wait a lot. We travel a lot, and you're always on the go, but that comes with good things and definitely bad things. And so the biggest misconceptions is probably that it's a very, very action heavy kind of a profession, and it's definitely not the Secret Service, and it's definitely not the big guys pushing people out of the way with no rules and half starting fights and helping the clients do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Hey, Chris, I want to change the subject a minute. So you grew up in Denmark, correct?
Uh-huh.
And how old were you when you came to the United States?
I was 21 when I came the first time.
So I'm gonna guess most people probably don't know where Denmark is or anything about Denmark. Can you give us like a quick dummies 101 course about growing up in Denmark and, you know, what's it like there?
Sure. Denmark is a very small country in the northern part of Europe. If you kind of have an overview of Europe in your mind, we're on top of Germany, below Norway and Sweden. And there's only about 5 million Danish people in the world. So it's a fairly small country. It's very, how should I say, developed. We all go to school for about 10 years as a minimum. Most people speak Danish, English, and maybe even a third language, which is typically either French or German. We have a kind of like very structured economy and politics and stuff like that, because we're so small, right? And we're very civilized. Most people probably know Denmark from either Hans Christian Andersen, soccer, the original story of the Little Mermaid, soccer, or Home of the Vikings, like the original Vikings.
Yes.
That's kind of what we're most famous for, I would say.
So if someone's going to take a trip to Denmark, what would you say, like maybe a few things that you definitely have to see if they go over there?
You know, most people that come to Denmark flies into Copenhagen, and Copenhagen is a really cool city in the summertime because it's, first of all, one of the old capitals of Europe. So there's a lot of old buildings, and most of the old buildings are actually still being used. They still look the same on the outside. You can only update them on the inside. So there's a lot of really, really cool like walking streets with little cafes and little bars and stuff like that. And Copenhagen was founded in the early 900s. So it's a really, really old city where there's built on top many times. So some of the houses you walk by can be from like the 14th, 1500 that century, and it was an old military city. So the old like naval quarters and stuff like that is still there, and people live in it. So that's a really, really cool thing to see. I think if you want to get a little bit more into the history part, about 30 miles south, there's a city called Roskilde, which has, I'm told, the best Viking ship museum in the world, and museums about the Vikings. There's a really, really awesome church where our kings and queens have been buried for years and years and years. If you want to do something that's a little bit more high tech, we also have one of the engineering marvels, which is the bridge to Sweden, which I think is almost 20 miles long. And it has an artificial island, and it's over the water, under the water, and you can do it either by car, by train, and stuff like that. So those are some of the things that are really easy to see if you fly into Copenhagen.
How often do you go back?
You know, I used to go back once a year before pandemic to see my family and stuff like that, but it's been a while, and it's almost easier now to bring my family over here, you know, because when I go home, I of course go back home to them, but if they come over here, they're on vacation when they come over here, and you know, there's always a lot to see in the US. So it has more been them coming over here the last couple of years than me going back home.
So Christian, you speak English, German, Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, like all these languages. You just picked up naturally. You went to school for them, or you just like a language savant, so to speak? Well,
there's a little bit of kind of like logic to it though, because if you speak Danish, Norwegian and Swedish is two different languages on the same base, right? It's a little bit more than a different dialect, but it's still kind of, those three languages are so closely related. So it's kind of like if you have somebody from Seattle speaking to somebody from Northern Canada, just with a little bit more, maybe different words. And that's the three of the languages, right? Then I speak Danish, which is kind of course, my regular language. And then in school, we learned to speak English. And I grew up in the southern part of Denmark, which is a couple of islands that are closer to Germany. So for us, it was natural to speak German than choosing French or any of the other languages. And me growing up, we watched a lot of German television, and that's typically what helps you get good at speaking these languages. And my English is obviously from my travels and living here in the US and stuff like that. But school gave me a really good background in languages.
So how do you keep how do you make sure your language skills are good? You know, in America, everyone speaks English. No one's really speaking Danish or German. How do you make sure you don't lose, your language skills?
It's very, very hard, and every time I've traveled in Europe and spent some time in Germany, I always come in with this false perception that I can speak with everybody and I can remember everything. It typically takes me a couple of days to get back in it, and I can feel every time I get back, I get rustier and rustier. It's very hard to keep remembering it because you don't use it enough, right? And then there's the other thing that a lot of people forget when you go to Northern Europe. That is that everybody speaks English and everybody wants to practice their English. So if you try to speak German to a lot of German people, they will automatically be nice and switch over to English because they can hear that you speak English better than you speak German, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very, very hard for you to keep these languages up when you go back. And, probably a couple of years from now, it would be lying to say that I speak these languages 100%.
Now, can you rewrite and speak all these languages?
I can make myself understandable. Let's put it that way, and I can understand what they're saying. It's always easier to understand what other people say in foreign languages than it is to talk to them, I think.
So, Christian, how did you, going back when you first started, what got you interested in this industry, and how did you even get started in this industry?
Well, it's actually a little bit of a different story. Like I said earlier, I was working as a nightclub security or a bouncer. And I had worked a little bit with some concert promoters and some different concert security and stuff like that. And one night I was working, these young kids come in and ask me if I wanted to move with them to the US because they have gotten a recording deal in Los Angeles and they needed a security agent or a security, they called it back then, we called it a bodyguard. They needed a bodyguard and a driver to kind of help them get around. And, you know, when you stand there on a Friday night, everybody's drunk and everybody tells you stories. So of course you go, yeah, no problem. I'll do that. And I didn't really think much of it. But on Monday, their manager actually called me and said, hey, this is serious. If you want to do this, we're leaving in 2 weeks. And I talked to my my now ex-wife about it. And she was actually the one who pushed me and said, hey, why don't you go for it and see what it is and try it out. And if it's fun, I'm going to come over and join you for a while and we can live in America and see how it goes. We can always come back home. So I kind of went over, and it turned out that these young kids had a production deal with a bunch of different artists in LA, primarily hip hop and rap artists that they were producing. So it was kind of like from Little Denmark straight into Los
LA.
Angeles. Yeah,
that had to be a culture shock, I'm guessing.
Oh, it was like day and night. I mean, most Danish people haven't even seen that many people as live in LA, right? Because all of Denmark, like I said, is 5 million people. So that is less than all of LA proper, right? And these young kids were producing all these rap and hip hop acts. And this was back when rap music really took off in America. So it was acts like NWA and Ice Cube and all of these gangster rappers. And these 19 to 21-year-old Danish kids were sitting there producing them while it was almost surreal sometimes, right? Because it was a totally different world.
So you got to see a lot of historical hip hop stuff in the beginning then. That's
pretty
cool.
Oh yeah. I mean, we met most of the rappers from that area or from that era. So that was kind of fun and interesting. And back then I really dig the music. So that was fun too. But I guess you kind of have to when you work in it every day, right?
Yeah, exactly. So another thing on your website, you have some blogs. I want to go over two. First one I want you to talk about is one blog is how to write a corporate executive protection strategy. Can you talk about the details of that?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that when we wrote the first book that we really wanted to get out there is that security is this weird kind of beast, because, you know, a lot of people come from the law enforcement or from the military or from a government agency, and then they come in and work in a corporation. And when they come to this corporation, everybody kind of have an idea of how security should work. And that's all good, right? But let's say that you got hired into corporation X and you have an idea of how security should work. You should kind of like sit down and figure it out and do a strategy for it, just like people do a strategy for developing software or developing services and whatever. But in security, we're typically more doers than we're thinkers, right? So one of the things we saw a lot was that people would hire executive protection agents, and they hadn't really thought through a lot of times, how many agents do we need? How are we going to run our coverage? Where do we separate the coverage? Do we protect the CEO 24/7? Do we only protect him when he's at work? If we protect him 24/7, what about his family? How do we do that? What about his travel? If we protect the CEO, do we also need to protect the number 2, the number 3? Is that something we want to do later? Is it something that we want to do now, right? So what we kind of came up with was a way for us to encourage people to write a strategy, just like you write a strategy for everything else, but kind of fit it for executive protection. And I know from a lot of people who have used the book that it's been very, very helpful. And we give an example, and I give an example on the blog, but there's many different ways to do this, right? But for me, it's more thinking a little bit more about it than just going into now, which a lot of people used to do in the past.
So next blog I'm going to talk about is you did a blog called Networking Tips for Executive Protection Professionals. Just talk about that and the points, like for everyone, is if networking is important, like why is it so important for your industry?
It's super important for the executive protection industry because typically we always try to facilitate the best way for our principals, right? So let's say that our principal is coming because he's on the board of another company, right? It's important that we network with the security agents and the executive protection agents over there, so we know who to call when we come with our clients. If they come with their boss to our campus, they know who to call, and it's kind of a good thing. But for some reason, again, in the security industry, and I think it kind of goes down to who the security industry attracts as people. A lot of us are not extrovert, kind of like people persons that like to go out and mingle and kind of network and stuff like that. A lot of business people that has been in business for a long time understand that their network is their net worth, right? And a lot of people understand that a lot of business come from people that they know, and the more they can go out there and network, the easier it is for them to find funding or find projects or whatever. In security, and especially in executive protection, we typically have an idea of being the other way around, right? Everything our bosses do, we want to keep a secret because it's part of what we do. We don't really want to talk about it because we shouldn't. A lot of people try to kind of like figure out who are all these celebrities and stuff like that. So everything we do is always kind of like bound in secrecy or extreme secrecy. So a lot of people forget to go out and do their networking, right? And once you work in this industry, if you want to grow and get a better job, a different job, and stuff like that, you really need to do the networking. Because also a lot of people don't realize that executive protection is very personalized with the agents, meaning that no matter how good you are, you typically have a lifespan on each team. And if you want to go from your own team to another team when that lifespan is up, it's very important that you know the other people in the business so you can get a job, right? And a lot of times, maybe not as much now when the executive protection industry has become as big as it is now, but before, it was very hard to find all these different teams, right? Because you can't just call, let's say, Starbucks and ask for Starbucks executive protection team. That will probably never get you through there. You would have to figure out who are the people that I need to talk to and stuff like that. And the best way to do that is through networking. And you'll actually be surprised. A lot of people who has taken our courses in this and wrote this blog and stuff like that, they come back and tell me how eye-opening some of these things are. And then I talk to other people who are in business and kind of understand networking, and they're kind of like, yeah, this is the backbone of what we do, right? So it's kind of interesting.
So Christian, from your point of view, what kind of characteristics or values make up a successful protection person?
That's always hard, and it's one of the things that we always try to analyze and figure out. But I think most people would think that I would say like you have to be really good at shooting and fighting and medical stuff and all of that, but you can learn that. Those are kind of like the hard skills that people can learn. What I think is important is that you're flexible and positive, and you're a self-starter and a self-motivator, because a lot of times you kind of have to solve your own problems, and you have to figure out how you do that yourself, because not a lot of people are there to help you with it. So I think those are important. I think it's very important that you have a professional kind of demeanor and a positive attitude, because a lot of times there's also this misunderstanding, that people who have a lot of money and people who need executive protection, they're not as busy as other people, which is probably as far from the truth as it can be, right? Most of the people we work for, work 14 to 18-hour days every day. You're always on the go. So it can be sometimes a very, very hard and lonely job to always be on the road as a protection agent. So it's very important that you can pick yourself up, be positive, get your work done, be a self-starter, be a self-motivator. So I think those are probably the most important kind of attributes that people need to have.
How does this work? Like, suppose you're protecting someone and they're going to fly from Seattle to, we'll say, Los Angeles. Like, do y'all, like, schedule flights for them, the transportation? Like, how much detail goes into that?
Well, there's a lot of details in this, and it varies a lot from client to client. Some of the biggest clients in the world who has some of the biggest companies or made some of the biggest fortunes or whatever, they have a lot of staff that's involved in this, and you're more focused on just the protection. But within the protection, you typically own the ground transportation. So cars and drivers, security around the principal, taking the principal from A to B, getting him onto the flight. Then you kind of hand off to the flight crew. Either you are with the principal on the flight, or you have another team who's ready to receive you when you get on the ground. Here, if the example here was somebody's flying to Seattle, obviously when the plane lands, there's somebody there who has managed to have 1 or 2 cars, whatever is necessary. There's probably an agent who's already flown down there who does the advance work, meaning that they know where we're going. They've done all the stuff we talked about in the beginning. And then there would typically be one agent that has flown with the client down there, right? So that's typically what we take care of. But some of the smaller details, agents are involved in everything from booking flights till dinner reservations till I don't know, getting coffee in the morning or finding the right meeting spots to choosing venues and stuff like that. And it also depends. Here we've talked a lot about people who work for CEOs and people who work for corporations. There's a lot of executive protection agents that also work for private families, right? And if you work for the private families, the responsibilities and how you integrate it is a lot different than from corporations.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, if like someone asked one of your people, hey, go get me a cup of coffee. Do you all say, hey, no, that's not what we're here for? But it seems like you just try your best to take care of them as you can.
It's very different because for me and the people that works for me and the stuff I've been involved in, I always believe that I've always worked under these 3 guiding principles that was called safe, happy, and productive, right? And in my world, we're there to keep the clients safe by far. But we only get to do that if we also keep them happy, right? Because it is annoying to have a security team around you all the time. So it's about finding use of your time, right? So if the client were to say to me, hey, go get me a coffee, if I had to leave the client, I would probably send one of the drivers, or I would ask the hotel concierge or whoever my contact person is right then and there. If it's something I could grab outside, let's say in the hallway, and get him the coffee, I'm not too high on my horse to grab him that coffee and give it to him. If it's something that could be facilitated relatively easy, I would do it. It also depends on where is the client when he asks me this. If he's in the corporation and we're in a secure building and whatever, maybe. If we're kind of out and about and out in public and whatever, I would have a hard time leaving his side and justifying it, right? But then again, you mentioned coffee, but if, for instance, if it was medication that we didn't have, it's different than coffee, right? So it's very important that you as an operator can kind of distinguish these things and figure out what should I do and what shouldn't I do.
So no, of course you're gonna be professional at all times, but how do you deal with that? Like if you have one client, like they're really nice, charismatic, everyone gets along with them, they treat you nicely, respect. Another client, like kind of like, just say the other person asshole, right? They don't treat you right. Of course, you're a professional, do the same service, but how do you deal with those 2 scenarios?
It's very funny because it's one of the questions I get a lot. And believe it or not, sometimes it's actually easier to work for the clients who's not too approachable, because you don't have to remind yourself all the time why you're there. right? If a client is, I hate the word asshole, because to be honest, I've met a lot of clients who's very guarded, and I met a lot of clients who is very kind of like shut off for other people and stuff like that. But in my experience, it mostly comes from them being who they are and getting to this level and stuff like that. And once you work with them for a while, they open up. And of course, they all have different personalities. Some are very jolly, and some of them are not that outspoken and whatever. But it's actually very, very rare that we've had clients that were direct assholes. But I hear from a lot of other teams that, well, we've been super lucky. So on the asshole side, I don't have that much experience with it, except from, I think, one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of EP agents does is they think that we're there to be the client's friends, which is absolutely not true. We're there to make them safe, happy, and productive, right? And if the client is overly nice to you, you have to figure out not to be so overly nice the other way that you kind of get drawn into the family or drawn too far into the entourage and whatever, because eventually somebody's going to turn around and say, hey, why are you here? Why are you not out in the perimeter kind of guarding and doing your job, right? And a lot of these people, like you said, are very, very charismatic. They're kind of owning the world. They're on TV all the time. When you go home and be with your family and you go to like the neighbor's house, and if they know what you do, people sometimes ask you questions about who you work for, and people think it's exciting. So it's very, very easy for especially younger agents to get drawn into this world and think that it's about them, but it's never about them. It's always about the clients, right? And if you make the mistake of thinking it's about you and get drawn too far into the client's inner circle or private life or whatever, sometimes it's very hard for you to keep stay on that team, right? Because once either somebody in the entourage or the client or whatever don't like having you that close anymore, you easily become way more annoying, right? So it's one of the things that we always train and educate the younger agents in a lot, is not becoming what we call the favorite. And in the book, we actually have a whole section about how you avoid what we call the favorite syndrome.
So, Christian, back to the example of someone flying from Seattle, Los Angeles. Is it safe to presume most of those people have their own private jet planes? Because I'm guessing most of them aren't flying like regular people on like in coach or on a regular plane, right?
Yeah, it depends a lot, and typically, we fall under the same rules as most other people in corporate travel. Of course, if we fly with the boss himself, we typically go on the private plane, or if they for some reason fly first class or whatever, we would have one guy that was close to the principal, either on the plane or in first class. But everybody else would follow the same travel rules and regulations as everybody else that works for that corporation, right? And they typically have rules that say any flight over, I don't know, 3 hours or whatever, you can fly economy plus, and if it's anything over overseas or a day or whatever, you might justify you flying business class. And we typically just go with the same rules as them. And if you're on the principal's plane, you typically sit up front, either in the jump seat up by the pilots, or you have a designated seat that's a little bit out of the way, right? And you also, as yourself, want to be out of the way a little bit, so you don't automatically get drawn into conversations and you can't hear kind of confidential information that might be spoken about on the plane and stuff like that. It's kind of an art form to stay out of all the stuff you don't need to know about.
So how does this work? I might be saying this wrong, but I'm presuming you do this travel, you take weapons with you, and of course weapons go under the plane. But how do you you're the currently checking your weapons in, people seeing those weapons, like how do you navigate through that?
It's a nightmare. And typically what we do is if it is an armed detail and we have an agent who is doing the advance work, he would typically bring the weapons down. And of course you need to have your CCWs, and you need to have whatever permits you need in each different state. And then you would have the weapons go ahead, because if you follow the rules, the guns has to be checked and in separate boxes and all of that stuff, no matter where you fly, right? and that'll slow everybody down. So typically we don't take any, if we are with the principal, you typically don't take your weapons on the plane unless you have some special credentials for that. I believe there's some former law enforcement agents and some former government agencies and stuff like that that issues permits, so some people can travel with their weapons on the plane, but I've never done it since I don't have one of those, so I don't know exactly how that works.
Can you take weapons on private planes?
That's a good question, actually. I can't remember what the rules and the regulations are, but I know that as soon as you take weapons outside of the US, it becomes a major issue. And you typically don't want to do that on the private planes, because a lot of times when you land privately somewhere, you don't get like the big customs kind of like clearance and all of that. Typically, they just come and look at your passport, and then you take off to the first destination. So if you had to clear guns or clear weapons or whatever, it will take some time, right? So we always advocated that if we need weapons, either we get local people that are armed, so we don't have to deal with moving weapons around. And if we can't get local people that are armed, we would send them with the advanced guy, so he would have some time to get all this prepared before the client shows up.
Yeah, it seems like a logistical nightmare.
It is. It is.
So, Christian, of course, you know what you do. You have to be confidential. A lot of confidentiality. So, do you all like sign NDAs with the people you serve, or how does that work?
Well, you know, if you'll actually be surprised, because we work for multiple clients and multiple corporations where we are the ones who drive the NDAs and stuff like that. But the way that it typically works is that the company and the security company has like a master service agreement that has NDAs and all that built into it. And then the security company on top of that have an NDA with each of their employees. And then when they start working for the clients, they sign an NDA with the client as well, right? That's the way it should be. Unfortunately, there's been so many people over the years that have dropped all kinds of weird books with their memoirs and stuff like that, where they talk about the clients. And I actually think it's one of those things that are very bad for the business that we live in. And it's something that we have always done everything we can to kind of avoid, by NDAing people and kind of educating them about why this is a bad idea. And we have it now with social media as well. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing social media. There's nothing wrong with having an active social media profile and all of that stuff. But you cannot talk about your clients or the client's whereabouts or what you do and whatever. So you develop guidelines for how to avoid this, but still letting your agents do some kind of social media.
How does this work? You have an NDA with the client, and let's suppose this client does something illegal. I mean, like something not only illegal, like really, really, really bad, right? Like no, newsworthy bad. You know, how do y'all deal with that? You just like brush it aside. You report it to the police. What's the dynamics on that?
You know, we try to monitor it on an ongoing basis, and you know, typically it's not something that starts overnight. And one of the things that is kind of like your, in my opinion, duty and obligation when you run a security company is have a really good dialogue with your employees of stuff like this, right? Because typically, if you have a bunch of people that work for you, you don't always know until somebody either tells you or you see it in the media or whatever. But if you do, we kind of like strike on it as soon as we can. And when I say strike on it, it's not always striking with thunder and force and whatever, but actually try first to educate them of why this is a bad idea. And if it's somebody who got let go, who holds a grudge or whatever, it can always be a little bit harder. And then of course you have to move in with lawyers and the whole thing to kind of get them to not do that.
So let's say like, how does this work? Let's suppose you have a client, and let's say they're doing, you know, illegal drugs with underage minors, right? Can the police then come and say, you know, you're a witness, or you know, you're responsible because you were there too, or how does that work?
You know, that's a really good question. And in the 30 years of me been doing this, we've been asked maybe 5 times by the authorities of what has gone on, and it has never really been like, I know it's always, people always think, oh, they do drugs and they do all of these things based on the things that we see in the media, but we've actually never had anybody who has kind of come from the police or from the authorities and whatever asked us these questions. But it's also, again, what I said earlier on, right? If your agents are really, really good and you run a really good company, you have a program where you teach them not to get too close, right? And most of the clients that we work for, if they were to do stuff that we shouldn't know about, they would do it when they're in the hotel room or when they are talking about secret information and whatever, and we wait outside, right? Because what typically happens when you kind of escort your client from A to B is at the end of the day, you escort them to the hotel room or to the hotel suite, and then you set up a perimeter which can be outside the suite. Maybe they have the whole hallway, so it's down by the elevators of the hallway. And then what goes on in there is typically not our problem unless we're called by the client, right? So a lot of stuff could easily have happened that we've never seen. I don't think it has, but I wouldn't know. But the few times where we've been caught by the authorities or whatever, it's typically they reach out to the company to figure out who was with this and this client and will we protect them in these and these days because they've gotten a complaint about this and this. And then we explain and say, hey, we wouldn't know if this cargo was on the plane or whatever, because we don't handle the flight manifests, for instance. Somebody else does, right? So that's the few incidences that I've seen over the years.
Okay, so very few then. That's great. So Christian, can you tell us about your own entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, I can do that. You know, I went to school like everybody else, but I barely finished high school back in Denmark. Then started working, but at the side of working, I had a small business that did some concerts and some parties. I worked a little bit in the music industry myself as believe it or not, a DJ. And it was very small entrepreneurial stuff, but it brought me enough that I got into the security business. I worked as a bouncer and actually had no real aspiration of building big companies or whatever. But I was lucky enough to come to the US, learn kind of the skills of being a bodyguard and executive protection. So when I moved back to Denmark, after I have done it for a few years in the US, I realized that, and this is back in the mid 90s, late 90s, that there was no private security companies in Copenhagen that had focused on bodyguards and executive protection. So I started my own company to do that because none of the big security companies back then was looking for people with that skill set. They were looking for traditional uniformed guards and stuff like that. So I started my own company, which were called West Security. And I grew that from, I don't know, from, I think we were about $2.5 million when we sold that company to what is now Securitas, which were one of the big Danish security companies that kind of grew and became big in all of Europe. I worked in Securitas as their special security consultant and ran their executive protection and stuff like that for about 3 years. Then my contract was up and I decided to start AS Solution, which were the second company. And that took me then from starting up till I sold it in 2017. And we had at that point about $35 million in turnover and say about 400 employees. And we worked all over the world. I stayed on for 3 more years with my contract. And when I left AS Solution almost 3 years ago, we were at 60, almost 70 million, on track to do 100. And we had about 700 employees in about 18 countries. And then over the years, while I built AS Solution, I've started a couple of other companies that I ran on the side, but it was all companies who would do some kind of a service for executive protection. I've never really been a big entrepreneur outside of this protection industry because I don't know, I still am so passionate and so interested in this industry that I can't really see myself doing anything else since, this is where my heart lies and this is kind of what I do, right? And that's also why when pandemic hit and I'd left AS Solution and I was kind of semi-retired, I realized that I needed to do something. So I started EP Access, which I'm doing now, which is primarily training and consultancy.
So Christian, like, how does this work, or what's the stats on this? Like, how often do people say, I want to be in the protection industry? They do it for a couple of months and then they're like, man, this isn't for me. Is that a pretty high turnover rate?
Yeah, it is. It's a very high turnover rate. And a lot of people realized pretty quickly it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. A lot of people come into this thinking that they're going to travel the world all the time and they're going to do all this really, really exciting stuff. But waiting outside a meeting room for maybe 14, 16 hours is a long day, especially if you do it 3 times a week. Also, if you work at a private residence, you sit in a small command center and watch the cameras. You go a couple of patrols, and besides that, you make sure that nobody kind of like jump the fences or do anything to harm the family that's in there. It can be pretty boring in the long run, right? So if you come into this thinking that this is kind of like an action figure type job, you'll definitely regret it pretty soon, right?
How do you make sure people don't suffer from monotony, boredom, and lose their focus?
Yeah,
that has to be hard, because I was Army pulling guard duty a lot of times when I was enlisted. Man, it's just so boring, right? It's hard to like keep focused.
It is. It's very hard to keep focused, but the agents that you try to recruit for this, if you can find people who are pretty mature and maybe have had some experience from the military or from law enforcement or whatever, or is very motivated, there is a couple of things that's really good in executive protection, and that is that we can, one, pay relatively well. And yes, it might be a boring job, but it's not a shitty job, right? At least you sit in if you sit in a control center or whatever, typically it's nice, right? And the shifts are typically long, and the guys that you work with are typically good guys with the same background that you click with and stuff like that. And then it's up to you as a leader to figure out ways to motivate, train, and figure out how do we keep these guys engaged all the time, right? And that, I'm not gonna lie, I mean, that's one of the hardest things that we do, because every time people get tired or unconcentrated or whatever is when they do dumb stuff. And sometimes that's very hard to explain to the clients, right? When you have maybe 2 or 3 guys in a control center, but they have to wait 5 minutes to get through their gate because somebody maybe didn't look at the camera and forgot to open the door or something like that, right? So it's very important that you as a manager or a CEO or whatever you do, build in ways to motivate them and always figure out that the guys that you have are happy to be there, right? And luckily, when you can pay them a lot of money for a relatively unskilled job, you can recruit some really good guys that understands that.
So let's suppose you hire someone brand new today, and they ask you like, what's my career path, right? Or for future development? Like, do you tell them like, if you stay with us for 10 years, you'd be head of a security company or manager or something? Like, what's the career path look like?
Well, that's what we try to do, right? Because typically most people that start would start working at either a private residence or a corporate EP team, and they would be typically starting up doing low to mid-level duties, and then they grow from there to come on, let's say we call them residential agents or RST agents when they start, and it's typically the ones that do the high-end static security. And then they grow from there to become travel agents and executive protection agents and shift leads, potential supervisors, and if they move on from there, executive protection managers, right? Not everybody's cut out in EP business to be a manager like in any business, right? But the perfect career ladder would be that you start as a high-end static security agents in a residence or on a corporate team, grow from there into the EP team, come into supervision, and then hopefully could be an EP manager or security manager down the road.
So Christian, how does this work? Let's suppose you assign someone to a client because they're more qualified, they're way more qualified. But the client says, no, I actually prefer this person, but in your mind, this other person like less qualified. How does that work?
That's a really, really, really good question. That is one of the hardest questions to kind of address, right? Because what happens a lot of times is, first of all, everybody's a security expert. All your clients are security experts, right? So they always know what they want, right? But a lot of these individuals that we work for are very, very, first of all, most of them are like very, very smart people. They all built great companies or made great fortunes or did great things, right? And typically nobody says no to them either because they have reached that status that they have, so they need security. And, a lot of times they kind of like love this person and they don't see who he is or where he fits in the team. And it goes back to what I talked about again earlier on of not overstepping your boundaries and get too close to the client, right? Because if you do get too close to the client, it's very easy for the clients to start loving this guy or girl. And they might not be what the client needs. But a lot of times if they really, really throw their eyes on this guy and they want him to either run the team or they want him to be promoted or whatever, all you can do as a manager is have a dialogue with the client and try to convince them of why it is the way that it is. And, a lot of people who have had security for a long time, they understand this, but a lot of newer families or newer corporations or whatever who haven't had security for a long time, they can fall into this very, very easy, right? And a lot of the guys that works in security are really strong personalities themselves. So they're really, really good at selling themselves to the client, right? So it's a constant balance that you have to have. But if you have been doing this for a while, once you kind of like sign your contract with the client and you start talking to the client or whatever, this is something that you kind of prepare them for can happen. And if you hear and see this happen earlier on, it's always a good idea as a security company to be proactive and reach out to the clients about this, right? Because most of the clients we work with can understand it if you kind of present it the way that I just presented it now and say, hey, I get this is the nicest guy in the world, but he doesn't have the management experience to run this team. So why don't we let this manager run it? And we try to build this guy up to become a leader for you. So a year or two down the line, he can take over if that's what you still want, right? And then you work with the clients that way. Because if you don't work with the clients, they're just going to tell you this is the way it is and then let you go, right?
So Christian, how do you deal with this? Like, so let's suppose a client has like close family, close friends. How in the past have you dealt with them, like quote unquote interfering with what you're doing?
Well, that's another great question. Most we usually say that the client is not always the customer. The client is the guy that we protect, but a lot of times it's the EA or it's the security manager or whatever who's the real customer, right? So now you have two masters that you need to make happy. You have the client, of course, and then you have whoever you work for, which can be the security manager, it can be the EA, it can be the EP manager or whatever. But then on top of that, there's also...
And I have to imagine too, you get calls from the spouse sometimes, like, I know my husband or wife said this, but I need you to do this.
Yep, exactly. But it also comes back to when you built the contract to begin with, instead of maybe doing one executive protection team, you do a couple of teams within the team, right? So the wife and the kids have certain agents that are assigned to them that do it in a certain way. The principal that might still be running a big company or whatever have a team that's assigned to him that does it a certain way. And then you figure out when they're all together, it's typically the wife and the kids team that takes over because they like it in a certain way, or whatever, right? So it's also about how do you build the teams for the clients. But it is a common problem, and especially in a lot of times in the celebrity world and all of that stuff, there are entourages who have big opinions on security, good or bad, right? Because it can also go the other way, that the entourage can be way too friendly with security and get security to overstep kind of like their balance and stuff like that, right? So it is something that you always have to work on so we don't fall into that trap.
Christian, what do you do for fun?
I'm a big outdoors guy, believe it or not. I like to go out with my Jeep. I like to be out in nature. I like to go out and explore. I used to say I like to travel, but I traveled my whole life for work. I still like to travel, but if I can go out with my Jeep at the moment and explore like the national parks or go off-roading or camping or whatever, that's really what I enjoy doing at the moment. But I'm also one of those guys that kind of switch it up a little bit. So right now it's camping and going out into nature, which is a big thing for me.
And how do you take care of yourself? Like, how do you take care of your wellness to make sure you don't burn yourself out and you're healthy and all that kind of stuff?
Well, right now I'm working at my little startup here, which is not as demanding as it was when I was running AS Solution. When I ran AS Solution, I traveled somewhere between 250 to 270 days a year and was always on the road, living on hotels and doing client and customer dinners and lunches every day and stuff like that. And it was very, very hard, right? Because you're always on the go. So it's very hard to find your workout routines, and it's very hard to find places where you can kind of like calm down and get your sin on and stuff like that. So for me, pandemic has actually been really, really good, right? Because when pandemic hit, I was kind of forced to stay at home and only do work through the computer and not be on the road all the time and stuff like that. So it's been really good. But I try to work out as much as I can, and I try to, again, get out into nature. One of the things I always tried to do when I was traveling and stressed was to build in a couple of hours to be a tourist. So when you go to all these different destinations, you actually had time to go for a walk before you take home or see the two sites you had to see in Warszawa or wherever you were, right? That helped a lot. And then it's a question about figuring out as a leader, the whole thing of delegating and not being a micromanager and figuring out what do I need to be involved in and what can the guys and the girls that works for you figure out and what do they actually do better than you, and then develop that in the team, right? And that's really where your real wellness comes from, because then it becomes kind of fun to see things grow by themselves.
So Christian, on a day-to-day basis, how do you make sure you focus on like the top priorities versus you go into priority number 21?
Oh, that's so hard for me because I'm very self-taught in everything I do. And I have a great, I always, forget me if I use the wrong acronyms here, but I got a great deal of, is it called ADHD or?
ADHD, yeah, ADHD.
Yeah. So it's very hard for me to focus and sit still. And actually before pandemic, I refused to believe that I could work from home because it never worked for me before, right? But it's funny how once you don't have a choice, you kind of figure out your own system. And for me, it's very much as low practical as it can get. You figure out the 2 or 3 things you need to get achieved that day and actually schedule it on your calendar so you have time for it. A lot of people that work from home, or a lot of people that are self-taught leaders and stuff like that, think that answering emails is kind of your job or whatever, right? And it's really not, right? It's about figuring out what do I need to make this work. And then one of the things I really started on here during pandemic is to eliminate the noise, right? I don't really have any or too many pop-up emails anymore. I don't really have too many pop-up things that pop up on my computer. I have to go out and look for all of that if I want to see it, right? I stay off social media in long periods of the day so I can get some work done, right? Else I get distracted and I'm all over the place. And it still happens, but then I'm 53. I also figured out that it's not the amount of time that you sit in front of your screen. It's more being effective in the time that you sit here. So if you have to take a break for a couple of hours, you can work at night or you can work early in the morning. I'm a very early riser. So typically for me, from 6 till 9, 10 is my most productive hours, right? And that fits really well, but that's before most people start reaching out to you or whatever. So that works pretty well.
So Christian, your current company is EP Access, correct?
That's correct.
So you already talked about the sum, but can you go into more detail, like why you started the company, what you focus on now, and what you see the future of your company being?
Well, we're focusing on training, and the primary delivery form right now is online, but online training is not enough. There's also physical training, and we're building that at the moment. And what we are right now is a training company. And then myself, I also do some consulting, because I've been doing this for such a long time that there's a lot of former clients, a lot of colleagues and whatever who needs help with very specialized projects, very specialized design of teams, and a lot of troubleshooting. A lot of times clients need to hear potential problems from other EP people than their own EP people, so they can kind of like have maybe a better objectified opinion on problems. I do a lot of that. I really enjoy this at the moment, and we're growing, but it is very small compared to what I was used to do. I mean, I have one employee besides myself, and then a couple of 1099s. And when I left AS Solution, I had over 700 employees, right? So it is a totally different ball game. And I don't know. We'll see where we go in the long run. Maybe we're gonna add some more services later on. But right now, it's this is what I do, and I really enjoy the training aspect. I built most of the courses myself, and what I really like about it is that it really makes me think about the core of the protection kind of industry that I love, right? Because all the experiences that I put into my courses that I want to give on, you really have to sit down and think the whole thing through, and I really enjoy that.
Do you ever see yourself retiring?
I guess everybody retires at one point, but I've been lucky enough to sell 2 companies in my lifetime, and I'm still only 53. I can definitely see myself go 10 more years, but I also know now that I don't want to be back on the road 250 days plus. There's no need for that anymore. So I hope that I can find a balance where I can still work another 10 years. And I think I still have a lot to contribute. I think I can give a lot to the industry that I really love still. So yeah, I would say at least another 10 years before that could even be a real thing.
So talk about this. Like, we're both in our 50s. Like, I'll use myself as an example. Like right now, like I have so much focus, drive, energy. Like if you would ask me in my 20s, I'd be doing it. In the 50s, I'm like, I'll probably like in the center rocket chair somewhere, like drinking tea, whatever. But like right now, it's like I have so much more to offer. Right? Can you talk about like having the focus and drive at this stage of your life?
Yeah, there's one thing that I really miss that I had in all the companies that I had, and that is probably one of the things that could motivate me to go out and do way more. And that is, I've never been good at working on something all alone, right? I'm really good at getting my creative thoughts out and solving the problem and getting the context together. But I always really liked vibing with the teams that I had. And the startup that I have now, I don't think that'll ever be a team business, right? So I really miss that. And I can see that when I go out for camping and, I do that with some of the guys I used to work with and stuff like that. We talk about the old days and we all get like fired up and motivated and stuff like that. So being in the 50s where I am now, I mean, I'm in probably the best shape I've ever been in. I'm in the best mental headspace I've been in a long time. I'm super motivated at the business I'm at now, and it kind of comes natural, right? So if I want to add more to my business, or either start another company one more time, or be part of another company one more time, I know that it would have to be with some other people, because I really like that kind of company vibe, and the little bit of competitiveness, and celebrating the victories together and crying over the defeats together and stuff like that. I really miss that part, right? And I think like anybody who's been a leader and have taken it to a certain level or whatever, a lot of us, we get kind of like very aware of who we are as people, right? And I think it's going to be hard for me to satisfy myself for another 10 years with this online and training platform. It probably going to need more, because I start kind of like feeling the urge to kind of go out full speed again, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. So, Christian, is there anything I should ask you that I haven't asked you yet, or anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I actually got to give it to you, Jason. You've either done some really good research, I've been super lucky, because you cornered most of the hard questions that people ask in EP. The stuff about the favoritism with the clients, the whole thing about how do we avoid to fall into the favorite syndrome, and all of that. And yeah, I don't know. I think this has been really, really interesting, especially because you and I don't know each other. And most of the stuff that I do are typically with security professionals. So it's been really, really interesting for me.
Thanks. Do you have social media or anything so people can reach out to you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm big in on LinkedIn. Christian West, my company on LinkedIn is called EP Access. I run on the website, like you mentioned, I run a blog that talk about executive protection and stuff like that. It's www.epaccess, and then go under the blog. But besides that, I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram as well. So just search for EP Access, and I should pop up right there.
And to listeners, we have the links to social media on the show notes. You'll find the show notes at www.cabinetstatesblog.com. Be sure to share this episode with your friends and your network, and rate, review, and subscribe to Jason's Cabinet Experience. So, Christian, we're coming into a talk. Can you give us any last minute wisdom or advice on anything you want to talk about?
No, I think we talked about a lot of things, and I feel like I've talked a lot. So I don't really have anything that pops up, unless you have something that we kind of missed.
No, I think we're good.
I think so.
Yeah, Christian,
a lot of fun.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.
And to our listeners, thank you for your time as well. Remember to be great every day.